Our next speaker will be Dr. Konstantin E. Kanakis, and his talk titled An MD with MD. Konstantin is a Chicago native and a resident physician at Loyola University Medical Center's Department of Pathology and Laboratory Medicine. He is Rush University Graduate College of Health Sciences alum and a board-certified medical laboratory scientist. He is a published writer, patient advocate, and physician scientist. With a career focused on hematopathology, transfusion medicine, and public health and equity, he has received recognition internationally for his efforts to combat Zika virus in the Caribbean and for being an early voice for accurate, equitable, and reliable COVID-19 testing in the US. From the American Society for Clinical Pathology, he is a 2017 Top 40 Under 40 Award, was named to the 2020 Global Pathologist Power List, and sits on several committees with ASCP, including the Commission for Continuing Education, the Social Media Committee, and Patient Champions Committee. His other committee appointments include the American Association of Blood Banks Education and Accreditation Committee and the Greater Chicagoland Area American Red Cross Auxiliary Board. A TEDx alum, he delivered a 2019 talk about the incredible changes to medical education and practice called Unrecognizable Medicine. As an experienced public speaker, patient advocate, and laboratory medicine educator, Dr. Kanakis hopes to break down interdisciplinary barriers in medicine, crush stereotypes, and re-normalize compassion in new ways. From the bench to the bedside, laboratory medicine provides a unique perspective on communication, education, and what it really means to be an advocate.
Everyone experiences setbacks, failures, mix-ups, false steps, and delays, whatever you want to call them, in whatever context you can think of. They're a universal truth to simply being human. When you scroll through your social media feeds, you'll often see motivational posts or screen grabs with memes and lines that say things like "no pain, no gain," or "fall down 10 times, get up 11." They're all great and true, but I often feel like they're just too short to express what it means to have a setback, what it feels like to be pushed backwards on your way to a goal. So in that spirit, let me share 3 stories with you that summarize one of my life's biggest setbacks and what adjusting, adapting, and thriving look like, at least for me. I had the chance to do medical school abroad for a multitude of reasons, some of which included its own list of setbacks and challenges, but not related to this story. I was so happy to begin this chapter, and as a bonus honeymoon, my wife and I flew down to St. Martin in December of 2015 before I started school in January. A few months in, everything was fantastic. I was adjusting to life on a beautiful Caribbean island, soaking up culture and medical knowledge, and we were happy. Happy enough to endure the mosquito's gift of Zika virus to us both. Ironically, and as a sort of retaliation against the mosquitoes, we both later started local public health research and campaigns on the topic, but that's another story. After a few days off with fever and a rash, things returned to normal. I was back to class, and my infinite cycle of sleep, study, and sun continued. Until it didn't. One morning, I woke up early, as I often did, to have coffee and watch the boats go out in the lagoon from our patio. But instead of breakfast, I ate some tile. I fell into the closet next to our bed, the floor after that, the wall after that, and stumbled my way to our bathroom as the world violently spun around me at 6 a.m., and me catching my breath in between puking and flushing my way through the morning. My hearing was absolutely gone. My wife shouted at me, but it was like a bomb went off, and I heard nothing but piercing, shrill noise. It lasted for hours. When things slightly settled and I was able to muster an assisted standing position, my wife helped me back to the bed awkwardly. I was propped up at 40-something degrees, trash bin in close proximity. With heavy eyelids, we agreed that I needed to go to the doctor. Doctor, I'm almost one of those. Could I figure this out? I felt drunk. Did I sleep drink more beer than I could handle? Doubtful. Did I have a brain tumor? Too scary. Stroke? Still scary. I didn't know enough, and I couldn't stay awake enough to solve this myself. I slept through the rest of the night, afternoon, and through the next day, completely undisturbed, until the next morning. A slightly lower angle of pillows, I cautiously stepped down to the floor and got dressed. We headed to the closest doctor's office, and he didn't seem to have any answers. He asked questions about my sleep habits, my stress. My episode was isolated, and he noticed I was a tad congested, so he talked it up to sinus pressure and said I needed some more vitamin C, as in the Caribbean Sea. I laughed, I said thank you, but my laughing stopped at the door. We sulked and went back home. Since that awful morning, I'd gotten a little dizzy and had a few spells of hearing loss in my ears, but nothing special. I thought I might have been overheated or dehydrated. So would you, the Caribbean summer's hot. But months later, at a Zika prevention and education event, it happened again. This time in broad daylight, with friends and colleagues surrounding me, and right after I was on local television. My wife promptly delivered me back to bed. Well, it felt like she was taking nothing but roundabouts home. Was I okay? Was I slowly dying? Would I have another attack? They come on so strong and fast. Would it happen during an exam? Would somebody think I was cheating on a test? Would it happen at the beach? At the bar? On stairs? Would I get hurt? How do I prevent this? Same deal. Next morning, we went back to the same clinic. This time, a younger local doctor and friend was covering. He listened and asked different sets of questions. It was the first time I heard anybody mutter the thought, maybe it's Meniere's disease. Great. I had a name, a diagnosis, a possible answer. And it was something that was coming up in neurology class next week. Perfect. He wrote me a prescription for some steroid pills for a week just to give my ears and balance centers a break. When Meniere's disease came up in class, it confused me more. It's often something called a diagnosis of exclusion, meaning there are about 100 other things that it could be that need to be ruled out first, before doctors shrug and say, maybe it's that. As a syndrome, the cause of Meniere's is poorly understood, and the only consensus I could find in any textbooks, literature, or conversations with other doctors was that it's incurable. Damn, I didn't want that. Maybe it wasn't that. Maybe it was just something that looks like Meniere's. I can't have an incurable chronic illness. I'm 29. I was referred by the last clinic appointment for further testing to look at my eardrums and have nerve functions testing done. This was my greatest lesson in bedside manner. That specialist asked probing questions and had strong opinions about my stress level, exposure to cigarettes and alcohol, and my non-existent cocaine problem, and the burden of being married. I got mad. She cried. So I've got a second opinion, obviously. After a few referrals from friends and locals, I met with one other doctor. I'm in a half-French country with a diagnosis named after a French physician. Let's go see a French doctor. A few tests later, he talked to us both about how Meniere's might possibly be connected to cervical misalignment. I was fleetingly hopeful. He gave me a book to read, and so began a long journey of sifting through anecdotal evidence from sparse literature on treatments and medications. With a lack of any reliable information on this, I was lost, literally at sea. A giant knowledge gap was decreasing, but I was catching up to a decades-old gap in Meniere's knowledge. I vowed to try to be healthier, minimize triggers, decrease salt, maximize water intake, cut alcohol and caffeine as best I could, and manage the stress and hold on to the hope that I would find more answers back home. Clinicals. The second half of medical school is a literal crash course in doctoring. After passing what feels like some impossible exams, you're granted clearance to be the helpful short white coat amidst all the grown-up doctors in the hospital. You see patients, you write notes, and you do exams and procedures. It's as exhilarating as it is rewarding. The hours are longer and the educational content is immeasurable. The pace is exponential. What better place than to have picked to spend my second half of med school than New York City, the city that never sleeps for the medical trainees that rarely do. My episodes had relaxed a bit. I was left with occasional fullness in one ear or another. It would come and go, but it would never last a week. Besides the episodes of dizziness and hearing, ups and downs, I now had permanent, unwavering tinnitus that never left. I have not heard actual silence since 2016, and it ranges from annoying to infuriating. But the Big Apple taught me something else to learn about besides medicine and tinnitus, and my biggest Meniere's trigger of all, weather. New York experiences drastic weather changes and subtropical fronts that hit and run. It's made me very happy to have departed our island home a week before the devastation of Hurricane Irma in 2017, since barometric pressure changes are my new kryptonite. Like my disease and to quote a favorite movie, the weather patterns come on you fast and they leave you fast. Excellent. Another thing I can't control about a diagnosis I know little about. Maybe I should seek out a doctor here in Manhattan. Certainly there are some renowned specialists that might have deeper insights. My wife, a doctorate-level nurse and now an amateur climatologist, was running thin on patients for things she had less control over to protect me. It was hard to find the time to make doctor's appointments when A, I couldn't take too long off clinical rotations, and B, I couldn't hear well enough on the phone to make my own appointments. So the months went by with managing symptoms and rain-related headaches and hearing fluctuations and explanations for my brain fog to new clinical preceptors every few weeks. It was exhausting. It was lunchtime one day and raining out. After a long clinic day when the spin started again, I traced a wall back to the elevators and made it up to the student lounge where I fell towards a bathroom. I recognized another student and asked him to help me. Help me how? I didn't know. The only thing I could mutter was emergency room, please. so we hobbled downstairs together. There, I somehow managed to explain what was happening, and they took me in as a patient, with my white coat and stethoscope hanging on the IV pole behind me. They gave me enough fluids and sedatives to relax my way through the worst of it. I only woke up a few times during my naps to see my best friend in medical school checking in on me in the afternoon, and later my wife when there was a lot less window light than I remember on the start of the adventure. Having been told that I vomited too much to be let go, I haphazardly offered my neighbor help with his EKG and other things I didn't remember. My wife convinced me that we should go home. I agreed. You can imagine we had the same conversation. Time to see somebody. So we made the appointment. This time the doctor was young, only a touch older than me, and happy to go over the ins and outs of modern recommendations for those with Meniere's disease. How I would have to allocate serious recovery time after every major episode, or that simply having an episode means I'm experiencing actual irreversible damage to my hearing. Goals include preventing these attacks at all costs now. He said his clinic had several, and even though it sucks as a disease, there's some helpful medication out there. I was happy and devastated. We were thrilled to have a comprehensive help, and mortified that I might have to deal with this forever. Would I lose my hearing? Could I beat this? Could I finish medical school? Can I safely take the subway? I started a process of carrying emergency medications with me in a collapsible cane, knowing that I could get worse or better at a whim's notice. After the first visit came another specialist for confirmatory testing of my vision, balance, and hearing, all of which proved by burden of required proof that I indeed had bilateral Meniere's disease. With the now official name of my nemesis, I began to collect more information on others' experiences with medications, treatments, and disease progression. I joined online support groups, discussion forums, professional societies, whatever I could, and wrote pieces about my experience to connect with others about this miserable ailment, all while learning for, caring for, and treating patients in medical school. What was shameful and embarrassing explanation cycles became important discussions about expectations. Men students are the lowest rung on the ladder, the least of which gets any concession in the culture of medical training. What happens if I get attacked with a scalpel in my hand during a delivery or when I'm helping out in a code? Was I more of a liability than an asset at this point? I was learning how to balance both myself on my feet and professionally. I learned a lot about boundary setting and self-care. I learned a lot about weather, mostly from my wife. Like most other things in life, clinicals and medical school came to an end. I graduated. I was officially an MD. Life goal achieved. But now came the hard part. Apply to and interview for residency training. In a daunting computer algorithm-driven process, trainee applicants from all over the world and country apply for fewer spots than can be filled in programs at hospitals large and small. I began my own campaign trail in multiple states across multiple time zones, experiencing hearing-related troubles the entire time. I'd newly employed the services of a crappy off-brand hearing amplifier in 1 year, but that was with its own trouble. It was bulky, the hearing was distorted, and sometimes there was a lot of feedback. The battery would die, one time mid-interview. Regardless, I made it through, and I matched to my #1 program here in Chicago. I was set to start my formal specialty training. I received my official paperwork in the spring and signed on to start in July of 2020. Along that roller coaster of challenges, both emotional and physical, my match cycle had ended at the peak of surging cases of COVID-19 in New York City, a few months before the rest of the country had its own peak. I found another specialist ahead of that time, this time in Chicago, and set to meet with them after my move. When moving day came, we set off in our U-Haul from one peak to another. As we drove west, the cloud of mask wearing and lockdowns followed us. New apartment, new job, new hospital, all very exciting. By July, I was eager, starting fresh, and all-day mask wearing was new for me. I had only worked, studied, and interviewed in a pre-pandemic world, but I was very happy to wear one in the context. A few weeks into residency, I noticed a problem. I was starting to lose my hearing again. No big deal. I've been there before. I dusted off my old screechy amplifier just in case I needed help and set off to work. My hearing would be back in about a week or so, right? Besides, Chicago's weather, way better than anything on the East Coast, but that's my personal biased opinion. Small problem again. Hearing never came back. My hearing stayed super low, and I was using old screechy more than ever before. I was flying through batteries. This was a problem. The practice of any kind of medicine is predicated on the interpersonal communications between physicians and others. How could I do that if I couldn't hear anyone? Were I not, my specialist appointment finally came with its own battery of Meniere's balance and hearing tests. Good news. My balance was doing all right. Somewhat bad news. My hearing had decreased. Shoot. What do I do? Is this little difference in hearing enough to ruin my experience? What had changed? It turns out when people took their masks off at lunch, I could hear just fine. I discovered I was a talented lip reader. How long was I lip reading? Had I adapted? Had I been missing things in previous conversations? Absolutely. But that doesn't matter now. What do I do with my decreasing hearing in a mask-wearing world? After a few trips back and forth to the audiologist and more hearing loss, the answer was complicated. I had reached the end of the algorithmic treatment of Meniere's disease. Surgeries are 50-50, aiming at the decompression of little sacs in the ear that overfill with fluid. Medications are helpful, but not a cure-all. Avoiding triggers and managing symptoms are the best, but what's the management for hearing loss if no medication has ever been shown to help with that? I had endured a few trips to the special ENT to get steroids injected directly into my ears, past the eardrum. That is no fun. And it helped for a few days, but every time I went, my hearing went back down afterwards. You don't know self-doubt until you take a formal hearing test in a soundproof booth, listening to words over headphones that decrease and increase in volume and clarity. The familiar multitonal ringing in my ears had evolved into this throbbing loud scream that isn't just annoying, but interferes with whatever I'm hearing. I often have to ask people to repeat themselves, not because I can't hear them, but because I can't hear them over the combination of a freight train, a tea kettle, and an air horn that's inside my head. Medications do nothing for tinnitus, and it's all coping strategies. Finally, my new doctor asked if I tried hearing aids. Hearing aids? Me? A 30-something new minted doc with a cane, some white hair, and now hearing aids? Great. I'm in my first year of residency training, and I look like someone in their first year of retirement. So with the graceful understanding of my department and multiple appointments for ear shots and tests, I had a session to get hearing aids. At my fitting, I remember looking at the brochure to pick out a color for the receivers. Should I get brown to match most of my hair, or white to match the direction I'm heading? When they finally came, I put them on. The audiologist turned them on, and wow, I heard her breathing. It was a big box store, so I heard a cash register. I heard some kid crying. I heard traffic outside. I was beyond amazed. My wife cried. I heard her. It was like the first time I got prescription glasses when I was 10. The entire drive home, I was counting the leaves on the trees instead of the green blobs I thought they were. It took, and it is still taking, getting used to. I still have good hearing days and bad hearing days, but the hearing aids must have given my inner ears some peace because they help with balance too. My ears are less tired, there is less straining, and less struggling to participate. Masks still completely obliterate any semblance of clarity I have. Unlike prescription glasses, hearing aids only comprehensively amplify sounds. They don't make things clearer. Even still, that's a win for me now. After getting back to Chicago, I struggled to hear my friends, my family, my new colleagues, but now I got some fancy tech that helps a lot. Major setback, small comeback. So why do you care if I can hear or stand or walk or anything? When something's wrong, we go to the doctor. You expect them to have all the answers, or at least know where to find them. This entire journey is one of not having answers or explanations, or even a good plan. It's been a mess, and so have I. If my stories leave you with anything besides lessons on mosquito prevention, coastal climates, and lip reading, I want it to be two things. First, every single person you meet is holding some invisible weight that you can't understand. A chronic illness, mental health issues, life troubles, or more. You've heard the phrase, we're all in the same boat. Let me add another. Instead, we're all in the same storm, in different boats. Some yachts, some dinghies, some makeshift rafts. And I'm not a great swimmer. We have to remember to extend compassion to people, to give each other space for our struggles that are visible or invisible, and give each other respect for what we're all individually working towards. We've got to protect the potential for others to grow. From helping people directly to now wearing masks, compassion is the best foundation for addressing setbacks. And point number 2, remember that doctors are just people too. For all the patients and families a physician might see, test, and treat, they're part of a family of their own, possibly and probably with their own invisible setbacks and burdens you'll never know about. In the face of the last few years of burnout and isolation, remembering our humanity is the key to any shared recovery together. I'm just one example, and I hope we get the chance to make our own comebacks together.
Thank you for sharing your story, Constantine.